Welcome to Women's 210 Culture Third Wave Feminism. This is the video for day one. We're going to have one of these videos every day to let you know what's due and mostly to go over the readings. Today it's going to be a little bit longer than normal, just to go over some of the details of the class. So there's several things you should do today. The first thing you should do is learn about the assignments that are due for the course that you're going to be graded on. There's another video for these assignments. You can also find extended documents for them in the content tab, so look up that. You should also introduce yourselves on the forums. In the general forum there's an area to introduce yourself, so please post there and say a little about yourself. Also, if you could upload an image to D2L to kind of tag yourself, that would be great. It doesn't have to be of you, but it's easier to keep track of people when there's a picture associated. The next thing you should do is, if you go to the homepage of the course, you will see sign-ups for doodles for the Skype sessions and for the media analysis assignments. You should figure out when it is you want to do those, figure out when those fit in your schedule, and sign up there. The main topic for today is an introduction to feminist theory. 200 level women's studies courses are a little awkward in that several people who take them have already taken women's studies, are already comfortable with the basic concepts within women's studies classes, and many people also have this knowledge from outside the course, from their own understanding. At the same time, there's some people that are taking these courses for the first time and aren't familiar with these ideas, and so in an effort to balance this, we're spending today talking about feminist theory. For several of you, this will be a review, hopefully a useful one. For some of you, this may be the first time you're encountering this, in which case you should go over these topics carefully. I've made a whole series of videos on some of the major concepts within women's studies. I recommend watching through all of these today, but I also recommend, if you need to, coming back when the vocabulary contained in them seems relevant. For today we have 3 readings. The material that we're going to address in this course, the material we're going to encounter, deals with some very difficult topics, in some cases some personal topics, some topics to which people have strong reactions, including the possibility of triggering reactions. I'm not going to do content notes for every single item in the class. You should assume, just because of the topic, there's going to be mentions of sexism, racism, colonialism, heterosexism, ableism, sexual violence, other forms of discrimination, pretty much throughout all of the material, because that's the topic of women's studies. When there's particularly elevated levels, I will include content notes on the reading. In particular, I have found that when there's personal experiences detailed, when people talk about things that have happened to them that have been violent in a detailed way, that can be especially upsetting or triggering for students, so I will, or for people, and so I will be identifying those where I can. Obviously, I can't know exactly what's going to be a big deal to everybody, so I encourage you to approach the readings with plenty of time, with the space, with resources that you may need, and we have some of those are listed in the syllabus, and we can talk. In addition, many of the readings and videos and things we're going to watch for this course contain adult language, swear words, discussions of adult themes and adult content. You should pretty much assume that the things we're going to watch for this class are R-rated. That's certainly not true of all of them, but we do have, HBO kind of level shows, so be ready for that. Again, when it does go above that kind of R-rated level, I will include a note. Some strategies for dealing with material that may be particularly difficult for you. Remember that you do not have to address every single item in the reading. The piece that is really very challenging for you to consider fully, then that's definitely one you can skip writing a reading response on. I do ask people to look at all the material if you're able to, but I understand if there is some that doesn't work out for you, and know that you do have that space if you need it. So our first article today, and this is going to be the bulk of these overview videos in the future, is talking about the articles, but our first article today is on native feminisms. It is from a special issue of a journal that was a series of articles by Indigenous feminists, by First Nations feminists, who were writing about the way that Native rights and feminisms work together for them. As such, you'll see lots of the article is actually introducing the articles that were in this journal. So it's kind of an overview. You may be interested to look at some of those in more detail. They're fantastic articles, and if you look up the journal under JSTOR, which you have access to through the library here, you'll be able to find all of those. Some vocabulary in the piece. One thing they talk about is colonialism and decolonizing. Colonialism is the system happened over the past 400 odd years by which nations in the global north, so we're talking about mostly Western Europe and later on the US, invaded, often took over other countries, stole their resources, stole sometimes their people, controlled their government, controlled culture, and in general there was a massive transfer of resources, material resources, cultural resources from the global south, Africa, Latin America, South Asia, Southeast Asia, to the global north. One particularly notable example of colonialism was the discovery, in quotes, of the US by Europeans, which of course involved the mass genocide of the native peoples in this country in a variety of ways and the theft of their land. Another very important element of colonialism was cultural colonialism. This was the claim, or continues to be the claim, that European white culture is superior, that European ideology, European peoples are superior, and peoples from the global south, native peoples, indigenous peoples, are inferior, including their religions, their way of lives, their way of thinking about themselves, their very bodies. And this was reinforced through a huge variety of methods by the colonizing nations, including forced schooling, where Native American, for example, children were taken from their parents, put in residential, boarding schools, and told that their Native American heritage was backwards, that it was savage, that Christian, European, civilized way of life was superior. They were forced to adopt European names, give up their names given to them by their parents, and generally kind of taught to hate their heritage, to think lowly of their heritage. And although many peoples around the world, including native peoples, resisted this colonialism of culture, at the same time it started to seep into people's ways of thinking about themselves. So when in this article they talk about decolonizing, they're talking about the process to undo some of the damage that colonialism has done. Obviously, many of the resources, the genocide that happened, can't be undone. But in terms of the legacy that colonialism has left, there's an attempt, especially by native peoples, to become free of that, to find a way that they can be themselves, a way that they can connect with their heritage that is disconnected from the colonial past and the damage that it's done to people's culture, people's psyche. Another vocabulary piece that's used in this is the false dichotomy. This is basically the idea that we think of there as being only either or, only true or false, in this example only feminist or not feminist, when actually the world is a lot more complicated than that. There's many traditions of thought outside of the classical European positivist logical way of thinking allow for a more complex understanding of the world. So breaking down those dichotomies, dichotomy meaning just a two theory, an either or. Another piece of vocabulary that's used in this piece is the liberal feminist. Liberal is a word that I really dislike because it's very confusing in that it's used in lots of different ways. The way it's being used here as liberal feminists is to talk about feminists that are mainstream, that are interested in working within the system, who are interested in working with government, with the legal system, with existing institutions, So in contrast, therefore, with kind of a more radical feminism, that's what they're referring. Some questions to ask yourself as you read this. One of the big questions of the introduction here is, why might people want to organize under the banner of feminism? Obviously, Native women have been organizing, have been theorizing their experience for hundreds of years, thousands of years, without the need for any such label. And so the question is, why might this group of women who identify as Native feminists want to identify as such? Why might that be helpful to them? They definitely have some hesitations, so think about that. Why do they have hesitations? What do they describe as the reasons why they might not want to identify as feminists? And then why do they decide that feminisms, as they describe them, are crucial despite these hesitations? And definitely think about that plural, the S in the title, Native feminisms. That's very intentional and important to their ideas here. The next piece is called Why Intersectionality Can't Wait. It's by Kimberly Crenshaw. Kimberly Crenshaw actually coined the term intersectionality. She is an African-American woman and a legal scholar and a very important theorist in this field. One of the things that I think is worth thinking about in this article is the attempt to make the law reflect lived experience. So on the one hand, we have the legal system, right, which is attempting to categorize people, define certain things in order to be able to understand them, in order to be able to prosecute them. On the other hand, we have people's experience, what their real lives are like. And one of the things that legal scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw are trying to do is to adapt the law in order to make it more accurate to people's lived experience. That's part of the project here. She talks about praxis. She doesn't use that word, but she's very much talking about it, and that's thinking about both theory and practice together. And this is crucially important when thinking about third wave feminism. You know, we can sit around the university and have all these theoretical discussions, all of these ideas, but what's really important is that there is change in the world, right? That we engage in activism. At the same time, we can run out and do activism without really carefully thinking it through, and this can be potentially very dangerous and harmful. It can exclude people. And so praxis is the idea that you should combine the two. You should be thinking about the theory whilst doing the practice at the same time. And she's really thinking about how this can be done in this article. I also recommend looking up some of those campaigns that she talks about in the last paragraph. They're very important contemporary campaigns, and I think you will benefit from that. The third reading today is from Tiger Beatdown, entitled My Feminism Will Be Intersectional or It Will Be Bullshit. This is a piece that I love. I think it's a very powerful piece. One thing about this piece is the anger, the emotion in it is very present, and I think that it's definitely warranted here. Often in the university, in the academic setting, we only allow language, or we only allow thoughts that are framed in a kind of objective, calm way. This is the expectation in the university, but there's some real terrible things in the world, and I think it's absolutely appropriate for people to be angry about them and express that anger, and that's part of the theory work we do in women's studies, is that emotion, other emotional responses as well. So this is quite intentionally an angry piece, and I hope you appreciate it for that. As a content note, it does include personal accounts of racist and sexist violence, and it also includes a lot of righteous foul language. One of the major things she talks about here are the slut walks. This is a movement that happened about 5 years ago now in response to actually a rape case in Canada, where a woman who was raped was accused of being a slut, and therefore they understood that she couldn't have been raped because a woman with a sexual history is seen as being an appropriate person to force to have sex with. This is the kind of position that the judge took. And so a large number of women took to the street in solidarity with this woman and declared themselves to be sluts, tried to reappropriate this term, tried to take back the term slut that's been used as an insult against women, and instead wear it as a badge of pride. It was a movement that spread very quickly. There was slut walks all around the world, and there was a lot of energy around it in a way that was very public. It obviously made for good TV, lots of women, walking in often provocative clothing, using, words like slut, this kind of thing that makes it onto the news. And so it was a very public manifestation of feminist activism in a way that a lot of feminist activism doesn't get that kind of traction. And so it was kind of a big deal for that respect. And so that's the reason that the author here is talking so much about this movement. There's also, this is an article that has an awful lot of depth to it, and you'll find there's a lot of great links here. If you feel up to it, you can kind of follow them and learn more about what was going on a couple of years ago in terms of activism, and those connections are definitely there to be made, but at the same time that's a lot to read, so feel free to kind of pass over some of the details. But I think the central message of this piece is really crucial. You notice all of the readings today talk about intersectionality. We do have videos that I made on many other topics within women's studies other than intersectionality, but in my view and the view of many others, intersectionality is really the most important, the core idea within women's studies and feminist theory, and so I think that's really important to think about. So have a read of those articles, take to the forums, watch through the videos. I hope you enjoy the material today. I know it's a lot of material today. It's a lot of listening to my voice, and I promise you there's going to be significantly less of that as the course goes on.